Yeah, I guess that New Zealand were defending really well. They had 15 men on the feet. They were up for in the contact battle there, and we had a few chances there and we couldn't capitalise, and I guess it hurt us there in the end.
As a performance of a whole of your Wallabies across this rugby championship, what have you made of it?
Yeah, obviously we haven't got the results we've wanted, but I felt we've built, we've improved in it, and but ultimately we need to win. So it's a tough way to finish the tournament.
The curse has been reversed. Well, that's the case according to Scott Barrett, the All Blacks skipper, who was a delighted man after the All Blacks prevailed 33-13 over the Wallabies to produce a clean sweep, perhaps to finish second in the Rugby Championship. But that's it for the home test. I'm Christy Doran. Joining me on the Raw Rugby Podcast is Tony Harper to dissect what we just witnessed. Harps, welcome in.
Thanks, man. What would Scott Barrett and the All Blacks know about a curse anyway? I mean, it's 21 matches now, isn't it, that we've gone to New Zealand and failed to win? Like we are the kings of the curse when it comes to the Bledisloe Cup and the competition against the All Blacks. So, they can have the win, they can have their curse broken. We still have the best curse going.
We certainly do. Well, at the very least, the capital curse, what we've been talking about for some time. The All Blacks hadn't won there for several years. They break, I think it's a 6-match winless streak that they were on. A couple of draws in there as well, famously in 2020 against Dave Rennie's then-coached Wallaby side, but also the Springboks too. But look, it was a really interesting, entertaining game, particularly that first half was end-to-end. And unfortunately, it was the try on the stroke of halftime, which was really the straw that broke the camel's back, I thought. That the Wallabies were up 12 points to 10. And, they'd fought. They'd, taken a chance there with Fraser McRide, a couple of penalties to actually make it to 13-10 from Noah Lolosio. But then Caleb Clark, as so happens, the All Blacks, they actually decided to turn down a shot at goals, Harps, and then that really came off. Justin Harrison questioned whether or not it was going to be a good call from Tim Horan, but when you've got Caleb Clark who hits those sorts of angles and cut through the Wallabies like a warm knife through butter, superb try, and the All Blacks, they never looked back, did they?
It was an alpha play, wasn't it, really? Because it was like, let's nudge ahead by a point here going into the break, or let's show you what we've got. And we had earlier in the Rugby Championship against South Africa, Australia's maul defence was atrocious. They were blown apart quite easily, and it had been all season. They actually held that one quite well, but then going wide and turned it on and put the points on. I get where you're saying with that try, but for me it was the try, Clark's later try, 61st minute. So much has been written, and Scott Barrett talked about this afterwards as well, about how they hadn't scored a point after an hour mark in the Rugby Championship. It took 1 minute into the post-hour play, and then they were over, and then that one was called back, but they came not long after and crossed for that try, and that kind of then ended it right there for mine. And Australia kept pointless in the second half, a bit of a flip from last week where they were so dismal to start with, but came home really strongly and made their fans, I think, very proud with how they finished. But this one, they were blanked. Obviously, there was that period in the second half there where the Wallabies were attacking the line. The All Blacks held out for 24 phases. My mind went back to when we watched the All Blacks play Ireland in the quarterfinal at the World Cup, and they survived that 37-phase play right at the end. Now, obviously, it wasn't to win a quarterfinal at a World Cup. It wasn't the last play of the game. But when you've already got a 20-point margin, you've already got the Bledisloe Cup, it's almost even more meritorious, I think, to have that, that defence and that attitude to holding it out. And the looks on the Aussies' faces when it finally all came to nothing was, it just showed a difference in the teams for me.
It was like a death by 1,000 cuts there in the end, wasn't it? You could just see every time the All Blacks continued to grow in heart. The fact that they lost Caleb Clark there with a few minutes to go, a bit unfortunate with being offside and playing the ball there when it spat out from the ruck when he was coming back. But yeah, they had their chances in the last 10, 15 minutes, but they'd been suffocated out of the game at that point in time. You look at the territory battle, and it was so dominant in that second half, the opening 10 minutes there, where the All Blacks were just playing at the right end of the field, and the Wallabies they couldn't get a foothold into the game. And I think a really key stat there was 612 run meters to 306, not 9 breaks to 4. And that kind of summed up the two sides. Even though the All Blacks only had 53% of possession, they managed to cause the Wallabies a lot of stress, particularly on the fringes. When Damian McKenzie came on off the bench, he injected a lot of pace and tempo into it. And that was the lovely ball that he put on to Caleb Clark there by sweeping around behind the ruck to play the short side. And it was quality from a big-name player, made a big play there. And I just always come back to, I think Damian McKenzie is just quality off the bench. He just manages to inject himself at the right time, the right place. And I think we'll see a lot more of him later in the year coming off the bench. But let's talk a bit more about the Wallabies. They were pretty impressive early on, weren't they? And
let's go back. We go right back to the start. Started off not in a great way with Taniela going down with his right knee, needing some treatment there, apparently a knee knock. But it looked, for someone who'd suffered through that Achilles in the lead up to the World Cup year, my heart sank when I saw that, and it was great that he could get up. And then they scrummed really well from there. We had a very strong scrum that saw Jake Gordon hand off to Andrew Kellaway, the kick ahead. And Jake Gordon, I don't know what he was thinking there, mate. Like, that ball is just there to nestle your tummy on, isn't it? And put your little hands on and claim the 5 and move on with life. Trying to scoop that up, that seemed a bit of a strange play for me. But even then, they moved from there into the next few minutes, a couple of 12 phases here or there, getting a penalty. They had good aggression and was a decent, intense start, I thought. Something we hadn't really seen, and certainly different to a week earlier.
Well, they missed the gate in Sydney, didn't they? They were 21-0 down after 15 minutes, and nothing went right in that first 10 to 15. But we did see in the second, we saw in Wellington that the set-piece plays were superb. The sweeping, the movements, very detailed. We've seen that already, haven't we? And this is probably we saw against the Box with the 50-22 play from Tom Wright, little moments. We actually saw not just one or two little moments. We saw half a dozen really nice moments there. And they didn't always come off with points, but that's definitely a layer. You could say that there's been a layer that's been added to the Wallabies attack, and that's pleasing. And it also occurs off the back of a bit more continuity. And clearly that's the 9th test of the year as well. So the shape is starting to occur. But look, they probably didn't, for all the momentum, the possession, the territory, the pressure, stretching the All Blacks defence, particularly in the outside channels. Rieko Ioane stretched there big time. They probably didn't have quite enough points. When you're taking on the All Blacks away from home, they needed one more try there. They couldn't just, penalties weren't going to necessarily win them that test. And it's such a fine balance between going for broke and scoreboard pressure. And I think they almost nailed it. They probably did, but they probably just needed to take that extra chance.
Well, yes, in saying that though, I thought it was a brave move when they had, 6 minutes in and there's an easy 3 points right in front, and they took the tap and go, and it led to the Fraser McWright try. So that showed good confidence in backing themselves. And then it wasn't long after that, we had that excellent move where there was some great invention in the back line before, I think it was Hunter Paisami pushed a pass out to Nick Frost that went forward after there was a really good break from Tom Wright and Peach. Yeah, Peach. It was a really adventurous play. And then, there was another one, I think, where Tom Wright went through the pass forward, and it was just too far in front of Andrew Kellaway. It might have drifted forward into touch as well. So still that little bits of execution there, maybe going just a step too far. Like the Paisami one, I think possibly didn't need to push that, but really good to see. And
He didn't need to push that, and Joe Schmidt spoke about that a couple of times, both on the interview with Stan, but then after with the press conference that I was just on then as well. And they're the moments. You compare that to Cody Taylor. Once or twice he found himself in space and he could have pushed and attempted an ambitious, audacious pass or offload. He trucked it. On a wet evening or a greasy kind of night, which is the conditions you get at this time of night in Wellington, you're going to get another 3 or 4 meters on the ground just through sliding. And that's one that he would definitely want back. And you're right to point out the ball that finds touch with Andrew Kellaway, potentially going to be in the loose as well. But there were some nice moments.
Yeah, just a point on that. I think Jack Gordon, when he spoke afterwards, he said that there'd been a lot of box kicking recently and that he felt that teams had analysed them and were ready for it in the backfield a bit. So it was definitely a change of strategy. And I've got to say, I really enjoyed watching it more. It was a more entertaining and interesting game to see them run the ball through hands and we had our wingers actually. We're talking about a couple of games where they played, I think the Perth one where they played the Springboks and it was rainy and, there was justification for the fact that Andrew Kellaway, I don't think, touched the ball in the entire first half out on the wing in that game. But it's so much more enjoyable to watch them having a go, if you like. I know ultimately they've lost by 20 points, but it's if we're going to rock up and be the 10th best team and lose to anyone who's half decent, well, then at least enjoy watching it.
Oh, David Campese would have been happy, and to be fair, it caught me by surprise. The idea of running the ball out of your own half when you've posted points or you're deep in your 2022, it's not necessarily the percentage play, but the All Blacks would have been expecting them to kick, and they didn't. And I think let's stay with the wingers for the moment because Dylan Peach, a starting debut, very impressive, wasn't it? And Joe Schmidt highlighted him. He was cramping towards the end, but that's a superb starting debut. It comes off the back of a really eye-catching, promising cameo off the bench in your first Bledisloe match. And here's a guy that's, you think about the fact that he hadn't even made his test debut at the start of the year, and I can see him now going on a bit of a run here and making that number 11 jersey his own. He's great on the ball. He's good in the air. We didn't see that so much with the decision not to kick so much, but he's got a bit of an all-round game, and you got to tip your hat to him.
Yeah, he was good in the air. There was that brilliant moment where where Beauden Barrett kicked for a penalty towards the touch for a line out, and Dylan was standing outside the field, and he jumped up. I mean, I think the Swans could have done with him today, taking a mark like that and being that impressive. I'm not sure they took many of their own, and that was great. He came up with a couple of huge tackles as well. There was that one moment where he did get in a bit of clear space and he kicked ahead, but he drilled it straight at Will Jordan. What about that guy's hands? Will Jordan, he's just plucked that out like shelling peas, wasn't it? And raced away down the line. That man, I mean, you look at the difference between the teams and you look at that player and you look at just how effortlessly he runs and what a talent he is. They could
makes the game look easy.
I know. And tonight, the All Blacks could afford to have TJ Perenara having one of the worst games I think I've seen by an All Black for some time at moments. He had brain farts all over the place, and they could still absorb, one or two of those because they've got Caleb Clark who give him the ball 15 metres out, 15 or Wallabies weren't stopping him if they tried on that. So, look, I mean, Peach, promising. We've got a lot of wingers, haven't we? And it's good to see him emerge. And he seems such a humble bloke as well. I haven't spent any time with him, but his post-match interview was very, very downbeat and low-key. I mean, what's he? If we're looking for someone to step up and really seize this, is he that guy?
Oh, look, I think so. And likeable bloke, has played on the World Series for a long, long time. It's great that he's got his Indigenous story. He's proud of it, but he's gone through a lot of adversity off the field as well, mental health issues, and but he's in a really happy, content place. He's going to be heading to the Western Force, which is where he wants to go next season. But he's a guy that barely had played for 15s for a long time. Goes to sevens, COVID comes, he decides, okay, I'll start playing a bit of 15s again. Starts playing for Randwick, pops up, goes from the back row to the wing, and all of a sudden he finds himself as a Wallaby. And the transformation, the ability to have done what he's done in such a short time, the sky's the limit for it. Like he's 26, 27, but he's 15s rugby on the wing. He's only in the infancy of his career there, so he'll continue to get better and better. Look, we'll talk a little bit about Taniela Tupou because we always talk about him. We mentioned off the top that he was injured. It looks like he was injured. It was as Joe Schmidt said, it was a bit of knee on knee. But from a scrum perspective, he's just so damaging. We know that the All Blacks struggled whilst he was there. They got a lot of ascendancy when he left the field and Allen came on, even though they didn't give away penalties necessarily. But you just hope that he starts to find confidence and trust in his body again, because it looks like he's mentally so frail with his body. Every time something happens, he's down, and it's the medical team's there. It's almost like he has to be convinced to keep playing.
Yeah, to me, it reminds me of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail, like having a limb hacked off and it's just a flesh wound. I mean, he went down, he came back on after half time, and having gone through that knee issue that, made us all recoil after a minute, it was about a minute into the second half and he hurt his shoulder in contact with Sam Cane at a breakdown. And he's a guy who came in for a lot of criticism and a lot on the raw.com.au, and we might have even voiced some of that ourselves for only lasting 35 minutes in that Argentina debacle. But to power on through those obviously painful incidents, fair play to him, to build back in and to kind of answer that. Like Alan Alatoa was taking his trackie off, ready to run on after about 80 seconds today. And then, it was a fair bit into the probably 50 minutes before he did get on the field. And when he did come on, he came up. Another thing for me, that we didn't really get the bench impact tonight that we did a week ago, although he had a massive hit on Wallace Satiti. And I know we're a Wallabies podcast, but that guy is amazing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
How good
he's going to be the rookie player of the year, I think. Eye-catching, great breakout season for the Hurricanes. But then what he's done for the All Blacks is just amazing, remarkable. And so if he can turn it on in one or two tests up in the Northern Hemisphere, convince a few people to vote for him up there, he's just a tackle-busting, shredding machine, and he just loves the contact, doesn't he? He's the sort of guy that you'd want, and that challenge and the matchup with Rob Valentini was a really good one. I think Mick Wright, he got shredded once by Jordan, but was really good once again. Otherwise, I thought Jeremy Williams had possibly his best game. Good in work rate. He's got subtle footwork. He can free his arms as well. I want to turn our attention to, actually, before we turn our attention to the spring tour and some comments about Joe Suaalii, 1 from 6. I know that Joe Schmidt mentioned that we got one more win than they did last year, but the reality is that they played 3 matches in the Rugby Championship last year, and they came short a couple times, obviously, and got very much beaten in Pretoria. But 1 from 6. I remember speaking to Sam Bruce about maybe 2 months ago, and he set the line at 1.5 wins. Would it be under or over? And he thought it would be under. I thought it would be under 2. 1 from 6 is not good enough, really. If you're in a competitive high performance, Australia's going to be last in the Rugby Championship, but there was some progress. So how do you see it? The campaign?
Well, I think you're right. There was progress. Some of the strategy and some of the play seemed a lot more developed and a lot more interesting than what we saw last year under Eddie Jones. We had a lot of bluster off the field, but not a lot of invention on it. But we are, clearly rugby is a game where you need a number 10 who can command and run a game. And we've spent a lot of time whacking Noah and people have stepped into that role again, and it's probably just reductive now to go over and over it. Tim Horan, he spoke about how Noah has to come into first receiver more, demand the ball, boss the game. And, it's so easy to say, but I think until we have that person, until we've got that player who can win us games on the back of their decisions and their movement, it's going to be a 1 from 6 in the rugby championship team, isn't it? You don't see it turning around in a hurry. You don't see us challenging the Springboks and the All Blacks. Possibly is a good time to tip into, 1 from 6, 4-5 overall record. What do you feel our prospects are going into these 4? The Joe post game, and I listened to the press conference as well, where he's talking about, look, we've brought in 16 debutants. We're still developing. This is about the Lions. I mean, this time next year, that's all kind of done and dusted, isn't it? And he's talking about going to the Northern Hemisphere, playing against these teams, getting a good look at those players, developing further. But is this where we're at? We're just a development team, and to what end?
The tricky thing is with Super Rugby, and this has been increasingly apparent, is that each of these teams, particularly Australia, is a development team because it can't retain its players. Too many of its players, the middle tier players, end up going overseas. You might be able to keep your top tier because you're going to fork out probably more money than you want to try to add some cream, but you end up losing that middle tier. So I think just over the last few years, we've just seen too many of them go. Guys like Isaac Rodder and Ed Hannigan and the Jordan Walisis, the Folau Faingas, guys that have built up 20, 30, 40 tests. You've got to be able to keep those guys. So, yes, there's a lot of them that are retained. Everyone that played this year, except for Marika Korobetti, is going to be playing Super Rugby next year. So Joe Schmidt has very much thought, I've been brought in on a 2-year deal, 1.5-year deal to get us through to the Lions, see how we can challenge the Lions. Now, and this is a question for later on, but who's then preparing the Wallabies for after that? Who's ensuring that those players remain here for the next 2 years? Because if that next core group then leaves, you've developed them for 1 to 2 years and then they've gone. So it continues to bring up this eligibility question. But you're right, it's a really tricky one to develop players from 0 tests to 10 tests, because you're used to talk about the World Cup. You want an average of 30 caps per player. And at the moment, if all these guys play next year, the Jeremy Williams are going to have 13 tests before going into a Lions match. So he's playing catch up. It's certainly not easy. It's probably a fail in terms of the win-loss record for this campaign from the championship perspective. But if the Wallabies can have the Tupos and the Bells and the Paenga and Moses and the Alan Latoas on the field for the next 12 months, they will be in reasonable shape heading into the Lions series. So they just don't have the depth underneath with the middle tier not being present in Aussie rugby at the moment. And that's why the McWrights and the McDermotts are so crucial. The Valentinis and the Wilsons, they're integral for the Aussie rugby going forward. I'm going to switch gears just slightly to something that Joe Schmidt was asked, and it brings us to the spring tour. It's going to be a Grand Slam tour for the Wallabies. They're pressing for their first one since 1984, I think it was.
Sorry. That's to beat all 4 of the teams. What's the opposite of a Grand Slam tour when you go there and you win none of them? Is there a name for that?
I don't know if that's actually occurred. It almost has occurred a couple of occasions. Michael Checker's first campaign in 2014 was a tough one before they went on their run in 2015. But a good point. I can't see them winning the Grand Slam, but they will need a win. They will need at least one win, I think. But one person that might be able to help, and Joe Schmidt was asked about him, is Joseph Suwali. And It's a fascinating one because Joey Swaley's already said, I'm going on the spring tour. Now, whether or not he's part of that Wallaby side or the Australia 15 team remains to be seen. But he was asked, what do you think? Is he going to be joining? And he said, look, I actually haven't had a conversation with him directly.
Wow. Okay.
If the powers that be say that he can come, great. We already know that it's already signed off. He's going to be going. He's fit and healthy. That's all sweet. He did compliment his goal kicking, but it was really interesting that I think it might have been Sam Worthington that asked the question, said, is he the X factor that's missing in this side? And Joe Schmidt described the side as being solid, perhaps not spectacular, and hopefully he can add that spectacular nature to it. But we've been asking the question, where's Joey Swaley going to likely play? And the first person that he made mention of was, I think Hunter Paisami's done a really good job. Now, he wasn't asked about Hunter Paisami, so I wonder whether or not he's thinking, we know that Swaley's spent a lot of time in the centres for the Roosters over the last 24 months, but previously on the wing too and a bit at fullback. Might we see him at 12? I don't think so early on, but I wonder in a year or two whether or not that's the position for him, because Australia's probably missing a world-class 12. He has that physical nature to him. It's more likely we'll see him on the wing. He could pop up anywhere, really, to be honest. He'd be just as effective. And as Michael Checker said, I'd play him at fullback. But where he plays is going to be fascinating over the coming months and indeed over the next year heading into the Lions.
I think they've got to pick him in the main squad. And Joe's shown, he's shown that he will pick debutants, and he is going with the narrative of this is building for the Lions. So, why not put him in there, give him a go, get him running. You're right, he probably starts out in the back three, but interesting. I hadn't thought about in that close in to the 10 and to the, in right in there. Do you think there's a massive adjustment for him to make to players of 12?
Oh, yeah, for sure. To begin with, anyway. Like, I know Sonny Bill Williams managed to do it pretty well. He obviously a back rower in rugby league, and he managed to transfer him. I think he was at 13 to begin with and then became 12. I just think that what he gets is gain line. We saw in that, even though the Roosters got spanked in the end against the Storm, Swaley's physical. He's about 192 centimetres. He's around 100 kilo. He will get you gain line advantage. He'll get you on the front foot, and that's what the Wallabies need. Probably a calm head who can potentially offload as well. So either way, I think it'll be good competition. But it was a fascinating little perhaps gem as to whether or not he's thinking about him at 12. I don't think we'll see it in this spring tour, but for the Lions could be a different thing. And we don't know where Dan McCullough plans to play him yet for the Waratahs either. But look, I think on the whole, just to sum it all up, I think there weren't too many players that let themselves down. I completely take your point. The Wallabies tend to start to own the game a little bit more, be a bit more dominant, a bit more commanding there. But I still think that he's going to this spring tour. Nola Wasiliev will be the first choice number 10.
Yeah, for sure. And there will be some nice late nights for us to sit up and see how it all unfolds, hey?
Can't wait. It will be, I think it's about November. I should have looked this up. I think it's about November 11, the first game, but don't quote me on that one. But either way, it's about a 6-week break in between. They were very much thinking about playing Japan on the way to London for that first game at now the Allianz. Once upon a time, it was Twickenham. But that test won't be going ahead this year. But really exciting spring tour to look forward to. I wonder whether or not Joe Schmidt, how quickly he'll probably stay in New Zealand, I imagine now, given that he's from New Zealand. And there are some training camps, I think, up in Brisbane next month. So lots to look forward to, including the Springboks and Argentina in the early hours of Sunday morning. Harps, give us a tip for that one. Who do you think?
Well, I think people will know the result by the time they listen to this podcast, so I'm not going to play that fool's errand. But if you want to tip a game that most people will know the result of, feel free, be my guest.
box by 15, I'll say. But Harps, it's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed these instant reaction podcasts too, to whoever's listening to it. I know that we've enjoyed dissecting it. It's not necessarily easy just an hour or so after full time. But Harps, thanks again for your time. I hope you managed to get a glass of red wine in.
Yes, I'm headed for my first very, very soon. Thank you.
Enjoy. On that note, I'll be back with Matt Tamur early next week. Thanks for listening to the Rugby Podcast.